These are some of the tools that you're going to need to have handy for working the sock. You're going to need 8 of these little stitch holders or stitch markers. I like these kind because you can secure your stitches on the holder by closing the little latch. This is an Addi brand hook, and I like it a lot because it's really thin. If you don't have one of those, you can pick up a knitting loom hook from Michael's for about $1. This one's a wooden handle. It's probably a little bit more expensive. The plastic ones are about $1. You'll need a crochet hook to do the ribbing pattern on your leg of the sock, or some sort of a knitting machine latch hook. You'll need a tapestry needle and some scissors. So when I'm talking about the needles on the machine, sometimes I'm going to say push the stitch past the belly of the needle. When I say that, I'm talking about that because that looks like a belly. And the hook of the needle, when I say hook, that's what I'm talking about, is this hook. And you'll see it better on the machine, but you won't be able to see this in the camera because of the view. And looking at the machine itself, these little red tabs that are sticking out, I refer to those as teeth. And this little curved area that the stitches drop down below, I call those sinker posts because that's the term I'm used to using with the flatbed knitting machines. And I can't think of anything else to call it. And also on my machine, I have darkened the numbers with a Sharpie so that I can see the numbers better, and I'll be referring to the needles by their numbers, and they're numbered clockwise. The first black needle is needle number 1, and they're numbered all the way to 22, starting with this needle clockwise around the machine. We're going to start knitting the leg of the sock first, and then we're going to start the short row technique on 13 needles. This sock used 15 needles, and it made the heel come up a little farther into the top of the foot, but it also allowed the heel to be a little bit roomier. So that would be a personal choice, but I'm going to do the sock that we're going to show today on 13 needles. Also, I like a really fat cuff on my sock, so I'm using this thicker yarn in the video, and it's a Michael's Loops and Thread Barcelona. It's a number 5 bulky. If it were any more textured than this, it would really be hard for the machine, but the machine seems to like this yarn okay. On this sock I did a different color heel and toe. I'm not going to do that on the video. I'm just going to make it all one color. And also I like my ribbing to go all the way down to the heel, or where the heel starts, and I like the way it feels on my leg better, and I like a really long cuff so that I can fold it down. So I figured about 40 rows for my leg so that I can do the ribbing and turn it down. You can choose to do whatever you want to for the leg portion of your sock. You can put in stripes of different colors. You can do a different textured pattern besides the rib, or you can just leave this as stockinette. But either way, you'll keep knitting until, and you measure as you go and count your rows so you can do the second sock the same. And once you have reached the length that you want, then we'll stop, or you can stop and start the short row technique for the heel. You'll need your main yarn. In this case I'm using the Barcelona, and you'll need some highly contrasting yarn for waist yarn, and I'm using Vanna's Choice in a blue, and it does show up pretty well as a waist yarn for this yarn. If you're using a multicolored yarn, you don't want to use any of the colors like white that shows up in the yarn because it could get confusing later. Choose something that's really going to stand out and be a pretty smooth yarn. So I'm going to start with the E-Wrap cast on now. Okay, make sure your yarn coming off the ball of yarn on the floor or wherever you have your yarn, make sure it's flowing freely and not in a bind, because it'll mess up your tension. Normally when you're doing an E-wrap, you take your working yarn and just wind all the needles, but I've always found that that tightens up pretty badly as you start knitting. So I like to do my wraps, my E-wraps, with a long tail and let the working yarn knit those E-wraps as you make them. So let me show you what I'm talking about. And to do this, you need enough of a long tail where you don't run out of yarn. So you just measure out however many needles you're going to be using on your machine. Just measure it with your yarn and then multiply that by 3. And that'll give you plenty of yarn so you don't run out. In our case, we're going to be knitting on all 22 needles in the round, and I've measured that out before and it was about 18 inches, so I'm going to measure out 3 times that length so I can have plenty long tail. And I'm going to take that tail that I measured out and drop it down into the middle of the machine, and then I'm going to go ahead and thread up the yarn guide and drop the tail down in there. So the next step, we're going to start winding the E-wraps around the needles using this long tail. First step is to get this needle up in position, grab the tail that's down inside and wrap it counterclockwise around that needle. You want the loop to be on the front and the X to be on the back. It's going to be an upside down cursive E. Push it all the way down to the base of the needle around those little red teeth, and use your other hand to hold it down below this sinker post that's beside that. And then I'm going to go ahead and crank forward to the next needle, and you'll see that my working yarn is already moving into the hook of that needle to get ready to knit that first E-wrap. So you're going to be casting on and knitting the first round at the same time. So at this point I'm going to go ahead and clear my row counter so that it can count that first round. I'm going to hold that stitch below the sinker post, wind around the next needle, push the stitch down, crank the next needle forward, and repeat. And I'm winding counterclockwise around the needle as if you're looking at the top of it. Get the next needle ready, and I'm going to go ahead and show all 22 needles. And if you get tired of watching me do this, you can go ahead and fast forward. But I think repetition helps to learn. Hopefully it won't be too long of a video. A little snag there. Also, as I go along, I'm sure I'll be making mistakes, so you may want to watch past what I do for every technique, and you can avoid the mistakes that I make and then also see how to fix them. Because every video I've ever made, I've usually had to start over several times. When I did the E-wrap the way most of the books and videos tell you to, using the working yarn to wrap the needles, I was always too tight and my machine struggled to do the first row or round. So I like this way. Alright, so when you get down to the last white needle, you can drop your tail down into the machine after you've wrapped that needle. You can also hang a clothespin on this if you need to. And as I crank this first needle up, there's no sinker post to hold it on this side because that's the first loop. So it's going to want to ride up with the needle. So push it down. And the first couple of stitches, make sure that they're dropping down below those teeth. So now I've got the first needle ready to knit my second round. I'm going to be doing a 1x1 rib for my leg, and with this yarn, I've already tested it out before, I need 40 rounds so that I can make the rib, but sometimes I like to just do 10 or 12 rows at a time instead of trying to latch up the long column of stitches. So at least the first 10 I'm going to start a small cuff of 10 rounds of ribbing, and then I'll finish knitting out the rest of the 40 rows. So let me go ahead and knit 10 rounds to begin with. And I'm going to be careful on this second round after the initial E-wrap, and I'm making sure what I'm doing, and you probably can't see because my hand's in the way, I'm shoving those stitches down below the belly and onto those teeth as that needle rides up. And I don't always hold on to my working yarn for tension like a lot of people do, but if you want better tension or you want the sock to be tighter, you can test out holding the yarn or not. Okay, sorry for the interruption. I haven't made it back to needle number 1 yet, so I'm still finishing out securing those stitches. So I should be able to continue knitting now without a problem. And go ahead and knit 10 or 12 rounds. And you can keep an eye on the needles that are approaching the yarn guide to make sure those stitches are dropping down over the teeth. A lot of times we don't know why the machine has dropped stitches. It's because they're not forming correctly, because the stitches aren't dropping down over those teeth. Okay, I've knit about 13 rounds, and so I'm going to start reforming stitches to make the 1x1 rib, starting with the first even numbered needle, which is number 2, and every other needle, all the even numbered needles, are going to be the columns that I'm going to reverse to make a rib stitch. You'll see that the purl stitches show on the back, all these bumpy stitches, that's the purl, and I need to reform those stitches so that you'll have knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl. So let me crank forward till needle number 2 is starting to poke up. You can wait till they drop on this side, and they can be a little bit easier to remove on this side, but I've been in the habit of doing it on the left side, so that's what I'm going to do. So just as this hook is starting to come up, it releases the stitch enough that I can get it out and away from, or out and over the hook of the needle. And remember, I'm going to be doing a total of 40 rounds, but for now I'm just going to latch up a few at a time. So I've dropped that off the needle, and it's really not going anywhere yet until I ravel it down. Okay, get your crochet hook ready, or your latch tool, or whatever you're going to use, and follow that column down till you get to your E-wrap. And the way you locate the E-wrap is at the end of that column. You'll see this pretzel looking shape with an upside down E. And if you'll study the way the E is formed, with this leg on top, and it goes around, and then the leg comes out under to the other side. If you ever drop down too far, then you'll know which way to twist the stitch to remake your your E-wrap, and I'm going to drop one on purpose after a while and show you how to fix it if you do that. And then also I'm noticing that this bump is on the outside and the new loops are forming through the top of that E-wrap. And so if you'll study your stitches as the machine is making them, then it's easier to know how to fix them later. So for now, this is my E. That's the hole for the E-wrap. I don't want to drop my ribbing down to that hole. I like to start one bump above. Here's the top of that E. I'm going to poke my crochet hook in that space there and just hold it there. And I'm going to go ahead and push, let all those stitches unravel. And I'm going to swing my hook back up to the top because it's going to be easier to see the stitches. So I've got a loop on my crochet hook, so now all I have to do is use these loops to crochet some chain, just like you're crocheting chains. You'll reach in and grab that, and I have to kind of twist the hook to pull it through that loop because I'm doing this upside down. Some people like to do it from the opposite side of the knitting machine, but I've gotten used to doing it this way. A knitting machine latch tool usually works better for this, but this yarn is so bumpy that the latch tool splits the stitches too much. It's going to tighten up on you, so start pulling your loop out, and the last one's a little bit tricky sometimes. So once you get all of them back on the needle or the hook, crochet hook, pop it back on the needle that you originally took it off of. Now all of these stitches are knit stitches all the way up to my needle, and the columns beside it are rib columns. I'm going to do a couple of more of those. I'm going to advance the needle that I just worked all those stitches on. I'm going to advance the next odd needle, which is number 3. I'm going to let it knit. And as number 4, the next even number is popping up. Just as it's popping up enough to get the stitch off, you don't want to go too far, because sometimes if you go too far and back up, you'll be messing stitches up on this side. Just get it just far enough for that hook to be above those little teeth, and that way you can maneuver that stitch off of this needle. So I'm going to reach behind there with my hook, my knitting hook, loosen that up a little bit, and then sometimes you can push down on the top of the needle, or you can reverse just a little bitty bit just to help get that off. So now that I've got that loop free, I'm going to look down the column of stitches. I'm going to locate my E-wrap, which is right here. I'm going to stick my hook in the space above that E-wrap and drop my stitches down. And once I've got them all latched down, make sure you have all of them latched down. You can count the ladders if you need to. Go ahead and pull your crochet hook up to the top and latch them back up in order. Don't skip any, because it will show on your sock. And just chain, I'll slow down, chain that back up. And I'm twisting the hook around just so I can get it back through the loop. It's hard to pull it through like that, so I grab that ladder, twist it around, and pull it through the loop that's on the crochet hook. Loosen it up if you need to, and pull that up and stick it back on that empty needle, and shove everything down around those teeth and the base of the needle. We'll go forward to the next even numbered needle, making sure that one drops down. I'm going to expose the hook, get that stitch off of there. We're going to reverse just a tad. Going to find that E-wrap at the end of the column. This time I'm going to let it drop past the E-wrap so you can see the catastrophe that happens, or it will feel like a catastrophe when you do it. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to fix that if that happens. Okay, let's drop that column down, and I'm going to let it run all the way past that E-wrap. And oh no, I've got a giant loop here. So remember when we studied that E-wrap before, it's an upside down E. So twist it around, and like the way I just twisted it, my right side is coming around, and before it was the left side. So I'm just going to flip that over. Just keep maneuvering it until it looks like it did before. And I'm going to flip it down toward me like it was, like an upside down E. And now I have that left leg coming over the top and then under. That's the way it looked before. So just study it, hold it in place, just like that. And then you'll take this first ladder and you're just going to lay it across the top of that E. And I'm going to reach under the top of that E, going to grab that ladder and flip it back around onto my hook. Do that again. I'm going to reform the E-wrap to where this leg is going around that way. I'm going to lay this ladder on top of that E. Just like that. Reach through the E from the bottom, grab that ladder, and flip my hook up. Now I'm back to where I started. This will be stretched out more than the other stitches next to it, but when we get finished with the sock, we're going to have to adjust that E-wrap cast on anyway, because the needles on this machine are so far apart that the E-wrap can be a little loose at the end. So I watched a good video on Yay for Yarn on how to adjust those E-wrap stitches, and it works really well. So don't worry about how you mess that up. It's still twisted in the direction it needs to go, but we'll neaten all that up at the end of the sock. That's part of the handwork that you're going to have to do. So let me do one more column. Here's an odd number. Here's my next even number. I'm going to expose that hook. Loosen up that stitch. Take it off. Find my E-wrap. Poke my stitch, my crochet hook in above that, drop them down. And I'm going to do a few more, and then I'm going to get down to the last even numbered needle. Okay, here I'm going to quit talking for a second. I'm going to flip that hook to the top. And when I get to the end, I'm going to show you that the E-wrap looks a little different where the tail of yarn is. So I'm going to redo a few of these columns, or finish the ribbing on all of these columns until I get to the last needle, and then I'll show you what that E-wrap looks like on the last stitch. Alright, let me move forward and do a few more. Okay, I'm coming up to the last stitch that I need to reform. This was stitch number 20. 21 is normal. 22 is the one I need to drop next. So when you get to the end of this column, the E-wrap is part of this tail, and it's kind of hard to figure out. Sometimes the tail will be this way and sometimes it'll be this way. If you kind of pull it that way, and spread this out, you can see that if this were connected to the next stitch, that would be your E-wrap. So remember that this tail is going to be the first leg of the E that comes around. So that'll help you to find that E-wrap right there. So don't let the tail confuse you. Just follow the column down, find that little loop, and poke your crochet hook in the space above that. And also, it may loosen up just like that. So just pull on the tail if it starts loosening up on you, because there's nothing securing it. So just like in crochet, and I didn't mention this before, you're going to want to put a little tension on the fabric so that you can form these stitches. I'm using my left hand to kind of pull, and because if I let go of it, it's going to be impossible to reach down there and grab stuff. So it takes two hands to do this. And also, I tend to forget about that last leg or that last ladder. So just be sure you've got all of them. Even if you have to count every time, count the ladders. Make sure you don't skip any. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and knit a few more rounds and then show you how to latch down to finish the rib if you want to carry your rib all the way to the ankle. Okay, I've knitted a few more rounds, and here's my needle number 1. I need to drop down needle number 2 and pick up where I left off. So I'm going to expose that hook, and now it's easy to see where to poke your crochet hook. All of these are knit stitches. You can see their loops are sunk down in there. But the purl stitches have bumps sticking out right here. So don't poke your needle here or in front of that bump, because when you reform your stitches, you're always going to have a bump that we left behind. It's going to show on your sock. It really stands out. So even if you have to go back a little farther, doesn't matter, as long as you don't go between these two bumps that are on the top. Make sure you're either between two sunken loops in a knit stitch, or between this sunken one there and this one that's sticking up. This is where you would normally go. It's okay to go too far, but you don't want to stop short, because then you'll have to drop that column and redo it. So I'm going to poke my crochet hook in there. You really don't have to, because at this point it's not going to run all the way down to your E-wrap. But I went a little too far on that needle, so I'm going to back up a little bit so I can get it off of there. Just drop those stitches down. And as before, swing your crochet hook up. And reform all the way to the top. And you would do this for all 40 rounds, or however many rounds you decide to do. Just keep on knitting as many rounds as you want to. You can do all 40 rounds all at once if you want to, or you can do a few rounds at a time. So I'm going to show you what it happens if you drop the wrong column of stitches. So let's say I just finished this even numbered needle and I need to drop this needle, but I accidentally dropped this one.